Thank you, Megan. I appreciate this opportunity. And Megan asked me to just provide a quick overview of the program, overall LANDFIRE program, in case some of you are not familiar with it or maybe perhaps need a quick update. So as it says here, LANDFIRE is a program that provides landscape scale, 30-meter spatial products, ecosystem dynamics models, and tools that support cross-boundary planning, operations, and monitoring. The LANDFIRE program is sponsored by the Department of the Interior Office of Wildfire and the U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management Branch, each of which has a business lead representative to guide the overall LANDFIRE program. Now, the Nature Conservancy, where Megan and I sit, we're major partners in the LANDFIRE program, along with the U.S. Geological Survey ARROS Data Center. But before we talk any specifics, I want to highlight two very important characteristics of LANDFIRE spatial products. The first one is that their products are comprehensive, and this is pretty unique to LANDFIRE's all lands, all ownerships in the continental U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, as well as the major islands like Puerto Rico and Guam that are part of our insular areas and territories. And second, LANDFIRE products are as current as possible. And this year is going to be a change. Beginning this calendar year, we will be delivering products annually that incorporate as much landscape change as possible from the previous year. So LANDFIRE 2022, which will be delivered later this calendar year, will incorporate as much change from the year 2022 as possible. So much more current than they've been in the past. So with those characteristics in mind, let's make a shallow dive into the program products. So LANDFIRE provides 6 types of spatial products, all 30-meter resolution, all geometrically matched. These products fall into 6 categories: disturbance, topographic, fuels, fire regime, reference, and vegetation. Now, there are multiple individual layers available for public and free download in each of these product groups. For example, within the vegetation group, we provide a historic vegetation type as well as a current vegetation type, but we also provide current vegetation cover percent and current vegetation height in meters. Within the fuels group, LANDFIRE provides both surface and canopy fuels information. And in the fire regime group, we uniquely provide a very large scale ecosystem condition metric, and almost nobody else does this. But we also provide estimated historic fire return interval and historic fire severities. And remember that all these products cover all lands, incorporating as much landscape change from the previous year as possible, beginning this year in the products that are delivered this year. In addition to those spatial products, we deliver 850 or so quantitative ecosystem dynamics models, and each of these models has an associated comprehensive description that goes with it. And then finally, we also provide and support a geospatial tool that helps local users modify surface fuels for local situations or more recent climatic conditions so that they can model fires more effectively. Now, LANDFIRE program products directly support wildfire decision-making because they're directly and fully ingested into systems like the Wildfire Decision Support System, often called WFDS. All the regional risk assessments in the U.S., this happens to be SouthRAP that we're showing here, the Southeastern Risk Assessment, but it's also used in the Westwide Risk Assessment and the Northeastern Risk Assessment. And LANDFIRE is also ingested directly into the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System, or IFTDIS. But beyond these sort of systems, there are also sort of one-off uses of LANDFIRE. For instance, at the Wildfire Risk to Communities website incorporates information that is based on LANDFIRE products. So there's always these sort of hidden ways that LANDFIRE data is being used. But LANDFIRE is about a lot more than just fire. We support landscape assessments that compare past and current vegetation patterns or evaluate current ecosystem conditions. We support the development of state wildlife action plans by providing historic and current vegetation information, and also a modeling platform that helps them consider the impacts of climate change. We've supported tribal resource planning in Alaska and Michigan and California. And importantly, I think the LANDFIRE program participates as fully as possible in key information exchange opportunities, such as the Western Wildfire Story map that you're going to see more about here in a moment. So with that quick introduction, I'm going to turn it back to Megan and to introduce our guests and let you know that I will be available for questions at the end of the presentation if you have any. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Jim. Next, we're going to hear from Autumn, who is the program coordinator for the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. She has a couple of slides she's going to go through, and she's going to introduce the Western Wildfire Story map, which is really exciting, and I can't wait for you guys all to check it out. She's based out of Oregon State University in Corvallis, and I'm going to pass it on over to her.
Hey, everybody. Just making sure, double checking you can see that and hear me, everything?
Yep, good? Sounds good.
Great. All right, thanks. Well, welcome everybody today. I'm glad to be here. And I just want to do a very brief overview today of who we are and why we created this story map. And just give me a second. This sometimes is pretty slow to go forward. There we go. So the story map was created by 5 exchanges from the Joint Fire Science Program's Fire Science Exchange Network. And the Fire Science Exchange Network is a network of 15 fire science exchanges that are organized regionally. So if you're calling in today from all across the country, you can kind of look at this map and see which exchange you geographically belong with. And our goal is to sort of break down fire science, that's coming out of these different regions. And the goal of the exchanges is to bring together partners and provide more relevant and current science to partners of all kinds working in wild and fire. So we work to foster active information flow for fire-related challenges, and we work to foster a dialogue in which scientists and managers in particular can help frame questions and research needs that can help address both planning and execution of research. And the 5 exchanges who created this story map are kind of just loosely circled here in this map. We have the Northwest, that's who I'm with, I'm the program coordinator. And then we have the California Fire Science Exchange and Fire Science Consortium, Great Basin, Southern Rockies, and Southwest. And throughout the day today, you're going to hear from each of these 5 exchanges about a fire that has happened in these regions and that we wanted to highlight in the story map for the potential lessons learned. And so a little bit about why we wanted to create this story map. We wanted to create it as a means to discuss in greater detail what we often see discussed as the, in quotes, Western wildfire problem. And that problem is that in general, fires across the West are becoming bigger, hotter, more destructive, all of those comparative words that basically highlight that fire regimes are changing in ways that are getting harder and harder to handle. At the same time, while that's being used to describe the Western fires overall, we also wanted to highlight there are very diverse inputs to this problem. And a lot of times they can vary regionally or even locally. And there are also very diverse outcomes in different areas. So the goal of this, the story map, is to show those diverse inputs and outcomes and how they're similar and different across regions. And also highlight the importance of understanding a whole variety of factors such as needs, efforts, solutions, future scenarios, and lots of other implications at local and regional levels. So we wanted to help with this office hours today as a way to introduce the story map and also to give folks the opportunity to ask questions about it, get some feedback on it, whatever you feel. If you have questions you want answered, we're here for that. And so we're going to go through each of them region by region, the 5 of us. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to the first one. And that is, we're going to hear about the Woolsey fire, which happened in California, Fire Science Consortium's area. And I'm going to hand it off to Eric Knapp with the California Fire Science Consortium to talk about that fire.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Eric Knapp. I'm the co-lead of the California Fire Science Consortium. We currently don't have a coordinator, so we're in flux. Stacy Frederick was our coordinator who put some of the information together about the Woolsey fire, but I'll be presenting that today. So the Woolsey fire, as the story map indicates, was the 8th most destructive wildfire in California history in terms of structures lost, infrastructure damage, and surprisingly, it occurred on the same day. It was ignited on the same day as the Camp Fire, which was the most destructive wildfire in California history. And there's some commonalities there. It's like, why do you have both these destructive wildfires on the same day? Well, both of them occurred during a high wind event, and both of them were ignited when electrical transmission equipment failed during those high winds. So those are, winds are pretty common in California in the fall, and in this Mediterranean climate we live in, we're sort of on the knife edge, where if those winds happen after we get some rainfall, it's of less consequence. But if we have a dry fall like we did in 2018, then it's a serious fire hazard problem. And in Southern California, where the Woolsey fire occurred, we get a particular kind of wind, the Santa Ana winds, which are these hot, dry offshore winds with single-digit relative humidities. And so if the fuels are dry, if we haven't had any rain, you can have a really serious wildfire problem. And there's really not a whole lot firefighters can do to halt such a fire once it's rolling. And the Woolsey fire essentially burned to the ocean, and that's what stopped it. Or sometimes you can wait until the winds die down. But there was a reason for choosing the Woolsey fire, and that is because we wanted to highlight and just add nuance to the Western fire story. So when we have destructive wildfires in the West, and we oftentimes poor forest management is often highlighted as one of the problems, and it gets the blame. But this fire is a reminder that a large portion of the acres burned throughout the West, and that includes California, actually don't burn forests. And so in Western forests, the dominant issue is oftentimes too little fire. These forests used to burn very frequently. They burn a lot less frequently, and when they do burn, they do burn hotter now. But the story is quite different in shrubland ecosystems like chaparral ecosystems in Southern California. Chaparral historically burned pretty infrequently, like on the order of every 20 to 90 years or so. And when chaparral burns, it tends to burn hot in a stand replacing crown fire. So in Southern California, and you can see from the story map that all of the infrastructure that's built into these shrublands, there's a lot of people living down there, and so there's many sources of ignition. And the issue in a lot of these chaparral systems is actually burning too frequently. And so chaparral doesn't have time to fully recover before the next fire. And then we have added onto that the problem of a lot of invasive species. So there can be a conversion of these chaparral shrublands to more of a non-native grassland with too much fire. The other issue, as I alluded to, is just the development that has occurred into these shrublands. Which puts them at serious risk when you have a wind-driven wildfire event like this one. So what do we do? It's very different than in a forested ecosystem where the focus might be on vegetation management. In the case of shrublands, vegetation management may not even be appropriate or may not do much to prevent infrastructure loss in a wind-driven fire event. So the keys in Southern California and some of these areas that burn too frequently is to prevent ignitions, to reduce the probability of too frequent fire. And also increasingly, we're focusing on adapting our homes and infrastructure to this type of fire behavior, because this is the natural type of fire that occurred in this system, a stand replacing crown fire. We've just put our infrastructure in the way of that. And so there's a lot more focus on creating infrastructure that can survive a fire. And one of the area of emphasis right now is creating a 5-foot non-combustible zone around houses, so that the embers that are tossed up by such fires don't have a chance to ignite infrastructure and then cause house-to-house fire spread. So in a nutshell, that's the Woolsey fire, and I will now pass it on to the person who's going to present the next fire.
That's me, Janie. Thanks, Eric. All right, my name is Janie Montblanc, and I'm with the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange. And with me is our co-coordinator, Corey Gooker, as well. And we want to highlight the Martin Fire. And I'm going to back up what Eric said about the fact that forest fires get most of the press. They're taller and they're more populated. But actually, in the last 20 years, more area is burned in grassland and shrubland fires than in forests. And so that's the case with the fire that we're highlighting as well, the Martin Fire. And I also want to say that for not only Nevada, but Oregon, Idaho, and Utah, all of our largest fires on record were all in rangelands. So the Martin Fire was, our problem here in the Great Basin is weed-driven fires. So it was a cheatgrass-driven fire, also driven by high winds. We have a cheatgrass fire cycle where the weeds burn and they like fire, so then they come up next and they just create a worse fire cycle. Unlike forested regions, sagebrush ecosystems don't benefit from frequent burning, as Eric was also saying, with their shrubland fires. Drought actually decreases fire risk in sagebrush systems because the weed crop decreases. Which is not that we want drought, but just an interesting fact for our fire problem here. And then what we need to do to help prevent these fires is basically restore our rangelands. So that's getting rid of the weeds, and that's a huge problem. But one thing that was very unique about this Martin Fire was the reseeding effort that took place after the fire was a huge collaboration of researchers and managers from different agencies, academia, and NGOs. And this is the kind of effort that we're going to need on a regular basis to save our sagebrush systems. So I'll leave it at that and hand it off to, I think, Autumn's next.
Hey, Janie, I'm going to interrupt you for a quick second. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we don't have PowerPoints by design. We were hoping that you all would have the story map open on half your screen so you could be going through it as folks are talking. And I also want to highlight LANDFIRE's contribution to the Great Basin part of the story map, where we just created a short animation that used LANDFIRE data to highlight the increase in non-native annual grasses from 2001 to 2016. So that is sort of the LANDFIRE role as that part of the story. So,
yes,
okay.
Megan, I forgot, I was going to direct people to that map. Scroll down.
Oh, no worries.
For a tab, and that's a really cool graphic you guys put together of our weed problem. You can see it, increasing, in the last couple of decades. Thank you for that, Megan.
It's staggering. Okay. All right. Northwest, you're up.
Okay, great. So here in the Northwest, hi everybody again, we really wanted to highlight the Beachie Creek fire. It was a fire that happened, it was unusual because it happened on the west side of the Cascades in Oregon. And most of the fires that you hear about in the region happen on the drier east side of the Cascades that are outside of the rain shadow. Fires there are pretty common every year. That's usually what's involved in our, fire season. And the Beachie Creek fire is really just one of like a whole series of fires that happened over Labor Day in 2020, which are sort of collectively known as the Labor Day fires. And there was, to a lesser degree, but still very significant in Washington as well. It was really the entire west side of the Cascades that this event happened. And it was really spurred on by kind of what Eric talked about, the Santa Ana winds, kind of a very similar, we have much less regularly, but occasionally have a similar weather pattern here where winds come from the east. And that has historically, very clearly over time led to more severe fire behavior. Winds generally come from the west, from the ocean, and they, sort of blow inward over the west side of the Cascades. And therefore the smoke kind of all goes east as well. So what really spurred these fires, it was the end of the season. It doesn't rain in the Northwest generally all summer long, so everything is really dry. That's all very normal, but it was hotter than normal year. And then these eastward winds picked up and really just, the fires just took off. They were massive. They burned more. They contributed to 2020 being the year with there's more acres burned of fire in 2020 than in the previous 120 years combined. So these fires, the Beachie Creek in particular, but it joined with the Lion's Head fire, they're devastating to communities. They flattened communities, burned almost 1 million acres. Human lives were lost. It's about 30 million in suppression costs. They destroyed 1,500 structures. So there really were just a massive series of fires that happened. And we wanted to sort of highlight this fire in particular for the lessons learned about it. The first and most obvious one is that extreme weather can have massive impacts. And so the ability to predict this is critical to safety. Luckily those winds were predicted and most people were able to get evacuated. And in the 2 years since, we've had a couple similar weather patterns. And I would say folks on the west side have been more eager to evacuate after seeing this massive one happen, this massive year. But some of the other things that come from this is that I think that there's a real lack of awareness in the Western Cascades of both landowners, people who live there, and before this, kind of in the general science world of that, fires can happen on the Western Cascades. We do know this historically, that fires have happened here before, but it's just not something in our recent history that we've dealt with to the same degree. So sort of they really highlight the fact that the Western Cascades do indeed have quite a bit of fire risk, and that needs to be evaluated and determined. And then also, I think what they showed was that there's sort of a lack of science. Most of the fire science we see coming out of our region is all on the dry forests. And that's changing after these fires, which is a really good thing. But just sort of evaluating the fire risk, how do treatments differ on the the wet western side, that type of thing. And there's a lot of post-fire research being done now on the west side, and a lot more science picking up on that. So in some ways it was good, not that the fires were good, but they really highlighted the science need and sort of an awareness amongst folks who live on the west side. That's why we wanted to highlight this one. And I will hand it off now to Gloria with the Southern Rockies, who's going to talk about the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome fires.
Hi, folks. Thank you very much, Autumn. And it was interesting that both the Beachie Creek and the in the year of 2020, both the Beachie Creek and the Cameron Peak East Troublesome fires experienced some record wind as well that really drove a lot of weather. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope everybody can join along, scroll along with a story map. This has been a long time coming, and in the Southern Rockies region, 2020 was the record-breaking year involving 4 different fires. The Pine Gulch fire earlier in the summer in 2020 held the record as the largest fire at, I'm estimating around 136,000 acres for about 2 weeks before the Cameron Peak fire ignited on, I believe, August 13th. The East Troublesome ignited as the Cameron Peak was breaking all records, I believe in October. And then we had, it's not on the map, but we also had the Mullen fire. If you look north of the Cameron Peak, along the Laramie River, that stretch of the Medicine Bow Mountains up across the state line also reached almost 200,000 acres. In addition, we had a lot of other Front Range fires going on. So we're still picking up after the aftermath of that. And one thing I'd like to highlight about this, we chose both of these fires because operationally they were very similar. Crews had to work back and forth, divisions had to work back and forth, equipment had to be exchanged back and forth across a lot of these, and they shared a lot of the same weather conditions at the same time and operational approaches. So everyone was impacted by both of these fires significantly at the same time. The issue of hours, we'd like to use this story map to highlight that these fires are the result of multiple interacting factors. We have a lot of historical fire fuel accumulation at higher elevations. These were Continental Divide crossing fires. This was mostly spruce fir that eventually burned eastward down into Ponderosa. So if we scroll down, you can see Continental Divide there above Timberline. The fire would manage to cross that with, I believe, 5-6 mile ember casts. Dense fuels, very, very dense fuels, a lot of which were the result of extreme beetle kill that went through the area. And if you continue to scroll down, oh, wait, I wanted to highlight, if you're scrolling down and you see the video of the East Troublesome fire, that's 15 frames a second. One frame equals 15 seconds. And you can see as it loops where it starts on the southern edge of the Rockies, and within minutes, it's spread that far north. And that's indication of the extreme wind and weather conditions in extreme fuels after I believe 2020 was a drought year, and we have some other webinars that I can put in the chat later that can highlight the weather conditions that really emphasize this. One of the reasons for the fuel was not only management conditions and drought conditions. There's also some sliders that show rapid spread that are really interesting. But we would like to highlight, yes, climate and increased temperatures and changing weather and winter patterns are driving what's happening with the fuels. But also, if we scroll down, there's a section that discusses the mountain pine beetle. And you can see, if we scroll down, the map that shows the spread of the mountain pine beetle epidemic. For the sake of this map and our data availability, we narrowed it down from 2012 to 2014. But as I remember, mountain pine beetle was really blowing up in 2010 as well. So from 2010 all the way through 2016, mountain pine beetle is really taking out a lot of these trees. And then you have another, 10 to 5 to 10 years for a lot of those major trees to fall over. You've got this almost 100% fuel layer on the ground that's really lending a lot to these extreme conditions. Since then, we've had spruce fir beetle outbreaks as well. So we're hanging on by our fingernails with fire and forest management here. What is being done? We're approaching with a lot of potential operational delineations, which are approaches to manage certain watersheds or areas that aren't dependent on jurisdictions or operational response. They're more on values at risk, or north slope versus south slope and access. And these pod areas can be treated as a unit and responded to as a unit. So a little bit of different approach in planning, and a lot of emphasis with the National Cohesive Strategy, continuing a lot of public outreach, and a lot of support with education and prescribed fire changes on agency lands. So this is a huge topic to tackle in just a little bit. Looking forward to talking with you about your questions. And I hand it off to the Southwest Medio Fire.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gloria. I'm Molly McCormick, and I'm Program Manager of the Southwest Fire Science Consortium. And I want to give credit to Barb Wolfson, who was the previous program manager that put the materials together on the Medio fire for this story map. And the story that we're telling with the Medio fire is not that it was big, but that it was small. And so it happened, the fire was lit in August of 2020 in the Santa Fe forest. And the Santa Fe forest is particularly vulnerable to large wildfire. It's on the edge of the range of the Ponderosa pine, so it's already under incredible drought stress with climate change, and in many areas highly overgrown. You may recall the Hermit Peak and Calf Canyon fire that happened last year in this area that burned 300,000 acres. And the Medio fire could have been just as catastrophic, but it wasn't. And that's because in 2016, the Greater Santa Fe Fireshed Project formed. It was a collaboration of the city and tribes in the forest to come together and start treating the forest with thinning and prescribed fire. And what happened was when the Medio fire burned, it ran into, on one edge, you'll see on the map, a previous fire. And then on the southern edge, some of these treated areas. And I like the story because it sort of answers for me this question of this overwhelming sense of like, wow, these forests are so large and how could we ever treat all of it? And what we see is when we treat certain particular areas that are priority for different reasons, when a fire starts, it can run into these treated areas and reduce in severity and then be put out. So I like this story for being able to show how important it is for thinning forests and prescribed burns. In the end, the fire was only about 4,000 acres. And that's a huge success. And this isn't a one-off story. We actually just released a video on the Midnight Fire and nearby in the Santa Fe forest. I think it was the Carson forest, where the exact same thing happened. The fire lit and ran into some treatments. So with that, I think I'll pass it back off to Jenny, who's going to conclude our story map for us today. And thanks, and I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So the last piece of the story map is just the conclusions and how we move forward from here at the national, state, and local levels. And I'll just make it really brief so we can get into discussion. But at the national level, the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy tries to provide overarching guidance for all of the pieces of the fire puzzle that we need to be building resiliency in. So that's the resilient communities, resilient ecosystems, and I like to say resilient management, fire management and workforce. And so, there are different ways that we can do that at the national, local, and state levels. But basically what we need to be doing is working collaboratively together, sharing all the information we have, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, fire research. We need more research. Putting in the infrastructure for communications and collaboration, and sharing all that knowledge together and working together across boundaries. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything, but
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to tag on to what Jenny is saying, that one of the reasons, and I had to step away for a minute, I hope I'm not repeating you, Jenny, but one of the main things we wanted to provide with compiling all these fires together, highlighting similarities and differences, was to provide a one-stop shop for people to inform policymakers as well, so that policymakers have this resource to go to as a research, science-based resource for legislation and policy change in the future. So we're hoping that can inform a lot of policy as well.
Thanks, Gloria. So here's the fun part of our office hour where we get to open it up and if Randy was here, he'd probably say stump the chump, but we have LANDFIRE leadership on the call. We have fire experts, modeling experts, and and we have, it probably doesn't happen very often that all the representatives from the Western fire science networks are actually on the same call. So this is an opportunity for you guys to ask your questions, get clarification on anything that was just discussed, or talk about something totally unrelated to the wildfire story map. If you have questions for Henry or Inga or Jim, we're here. So feel free to unmute yourself. This is super informal, and we'd love to hear from you.
Megan, I have a question if I could. What are the plans for this story map? Is there a plan to make another one later on? How are you going to promote it? What are the plans, next steps for the story map itself?
That is a good question. Well, besides putting it, we've all, shared it out with our participants on our various newsletters and social media platforms. Yeah, and we have this office hour here. And as we meet with, higher level people in our own regional organizations, we'll share it with them as well. Outside of that, I don't know if there are additional plans. Why, do you have some ideas?
Well, not yet, but I'd like for LANDFIRE to be of assistance wherever we can. I will probably defer to Megan on some of this, but just wanted to know what you guys thought. I understand you're going to share it with your exchanges. What about the national JFSP program? Ed Brunson, etc. Anything we can do with them, perhaps?
Oh yeah, we'll ask them to share it out on one of their Friday flashes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I have to thank LANDFIRE so much for creating a permanent home for this story map as well, and a lot of the great graphics. I mean, you are a great partner in this. So this partnership has been wonderful, and I look forward to doing more things like this.
We do too, and thanks to Megan for being our contact point on that. Jenny, we appreciate it.
Yeah, Jim, that's a really good point, that we worked closely with LANDFIRE and Megan and Randy. Hope I don't butcher his last name. Swady, your GIS mapping specialist, really contributed a lot of ideas to how we want to show past historical fire and current fire by state. We looked at a lot of different metrics to include, and in the end, we really felt it's long as it is, because we're tackling a lot of big issues. So the challenge of what to include and what not to include was a major one that took a lot of time. So this could really be a springboard for other more comprehensive mapping and historical fuels and predictive modeling and other stuff by our regions. We could look at other LANDFIRE projects in the future.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear that. Now, I'm just, my brain is clicking a bit, saying I think there's follow-ons to this, and I'll get back with Megan about it, that are kind of coming to me. Some of the science that's being worked on, even by our team, Corey with the Fire Scar Network, with the work at Idaho about ignitions in the Great Basin. I mean, I can think of many things that might follow on from this, but I'll work with Megan to keep in touch with you. Okay, thanks.
Now I'm kind of thinking, wow, we never invited Jim on any of our meetings. So, so this is our section. Since there were so many cumulative factors, there was all this fuel, there was the bugs, there was the mountain communities, there was all the pre-fire mitigation efforts and education that went into it that saved a lot of lives. I mean, both of these fires together were well over 500,000 acres. And similar to the Beachie Creek, the East Troublesome burned 128,000 acres within 24 hours. And one story I didn't highlight was that it's a testament to the planning efforts of the small town or, small city, mountain city fire departments that no lives were lost. And those towns had to evacuate in the middle of the night in 45 minutes. So I would encourage anybody to look at those links we've posted in there. And if you have suggestions for the Southern Rockies section, I'm very interested. I'll post my email here as well. But it was, they like to highlight that it was the coordination and the pre-fire anticipation that really saved a lot of lives, except for 2 people who chose not to leave their house. So, and they were trying to be rescued and it was too late. So that's a real story that we would like to highlight. Enough of me talking.
I'll go next, Megan. I've got a question. So really nice job on the story map. I guess I'm curious, I love what Gloria just had to say about, public. And I am curious how the network of consortiums are looking at this and how it can be maybe communicated to the public to show what needs to happen and, their part in the problem so that we look at this as a more collective solution and not just an issue that, oh, well, that's on federal lands or that's on, some state lands, but these fires have far-reaching effects. And so I think we need to, I'm curious what, you as the leads across the consortiums think are, how do we approach that question of communicating to the public and improving, that information so that they see their part and play a larger role?
That's a really good question, especially, for us in the Great Basin because 85% of our lands are federally owned. Our participants are largely federal land managers and university and NGO researchers. So, the public, everything we do is and have is open to the public, but we don't reach out to them probably as much as we should because of that land ownership, that unique land ownership in our region. But yeah, you've got me thinking that maybe we should be sharing this with I right after this, I'm jumping back over to the Wildland Urban Interface Conference here in Reno, and there's fire chiefs, from all over, and maybe this is something we should be sharing out with our local fire chiefs.
That's a great response. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. This was done on kind of with a lot of their input. The videos for the Southern Rockies section are directly from a lot of operational recordings on response. So I'd like to definitely make sure that they have these resources as well, is highlighting their work. Taking components of this and making briefs and rat cards and other smaller parts, we kind of wanted to design this in a way where we could take it apart and use different parts of it for other outreach messages as well. Is also another way we can use it.
I think, in the Northwest in particular, it's like we could make, I think after this, a whole story map on what's happened after these fires as well. We had to summarize the information, like so little, in there just to sort of cover this Western wildfire problem. But there's so much that's like happened. I would call those Labor Day fires really like kind of a game changing, event that happened both in like management and in the fire science community as well. So and in policy as well. Actually, like there's, on all of those levels, they really highlighted the need for different knowledge to be created, different management actions that were needed, different awareness of fire risk in areas that weren't really highlighted before. So there's so much to say about all the things that have happened sort of since then. So they're really good fires to highlight, but there's so much other information we could build on it with.
I wanted to go back to the, can you guys hear me okay? I wanted to go back to the idea of bringing the public in. I think our public is the education level of our public and fire knowledge is only increasing. So I think they really are ready for something like this that shows like the complexity and the differences, how we can't really just call wildfire. We need to we need to be talking to them in a more educated way. They are an educated public now, and I think the more we can highlight nuances and differences, and we just need to understand that they really are educated and ready for something more nuanced and direct. And I wonder if maybe there's a role for our partnerships with Extension. That might be another place where we could start to do a little more crossover, but maybe someone on the call has another idea.
I'll just comment, Corey. I appreciate that. The reason I bring it up is if Jim Menakis, who's the Forest Service business leader here, he's recently, commented, I pulled up LANDFIRE maps. I looked at my backyard and it didn't make sense to me. Okay. Which that's telling, as the Forest Service national ecologist, that's like looking at LANDFIRE and going, hey, and of course, LANDFIRE isn't necessarily intended for that really local, your backyard, favorite pixel kind of, approach. But at the same token, there's still some value there. So I just bring it up in the context of the story maps are really, really good. They're a great platform, but I do think we need to focus it on what is important to the public, why should they care, and how can we help bridge that, exactly like Corey's talking about, because I do feel like there are a large group out there. They're very educated. They do understand. They're understanding the issues more than they ever have before, just because fire is more prevalent than what we've seen. And so somehow we've got to do a better job of communicating with them so that they're part of the solution and not just somebody we talk to, because I think it takes that public engagement, involvement to help us make a difference. So I really appreciate those comments, Corey.
Yeah, Megan, I was going to say, not just NRCS, but the conservation districts themselves, because they have each has a board and they're made up of private landowners, and they coordinate. They have a legal relationship with the USDA to provide information exchange and help provide linkages to the federal agencies to the private landowners. I'm just thinking about their, Great Basin, places like that. 85% of the land ownership is federal, but a lot of the power structure, a lot of the decision makers, et cetera, they're with the private landowners. They're the people's, the influential cattlemen and farmers and et cetera, et cetera. Each state has all the conservation districts have a state representative and office. That might be a good place to share the story map with them, with the state conservation districts, and then they can disseminate to all the local groups.
That's a really good idea. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Tim. It's one thing that we put this out on our networks, which are pretty, I guess, have wide reach. We have newsletters that come out that are regularly opened by and shared, and our open rates and click rates and all that. Our metrics look really good, but that's different than targeting certain people that we know could really benefit this in a targeted campaign.
Oh, I was just going to say, going back to the public, that this is beyond our scope of what we can do, but I look forward to the day when you buy a home, you get your little fire packet. Like, here's your fire protection district. This is the information you need. This is who you contact. This is what you can do. I can't believe that we don't have that already.